The galaxy had ruled itself for so long that it mistook age for wisdom and size for certainty. Empires rose, merged, collapsed, and rebranded, but the conclusion never changed. Power belonged to those who displayed it loudly. Fleets paraded. Weapons were demonstrated. Borders were enforced with spectacle. Into that system arrived humanity, small by comparison, unadorned by ritual, and frustratingly quiet. Earth did not announce itself with conquest or miracles. It petitioned. It negotiated. It signed agreements that limited its own reach more strictly than required. When asked to display military capacity, human envoys declined with measured language, citing stability, shared prosperity, and long-term balance. This restraint was catalogued, discussed, and ultimately misinterpreted. In council chambers and strategic briefings, the verdict hardened: humans were cautious because they were afraid. The first warnings came early and politely. Human diplomats noted incursions near their colonies and requested adjustments. They did not threaten retaliation. They did not escalate. They documented, waited, and asked again. When trade lanes were pressured, Earth proposed arbitration. When research stations were shadowed by foreign patrols, Earth filed protests framed as cooperation. Each message was archived, time-stamped, and answered with delay or dismissal. The galaxy was accustomed to fear masquerading as diplomacy. It had seen species plead before collapse and learned to read restraint as surrender. Analysts pointed to humanity's lack of visible superweapons and the absence of aggressive posturing. Commentators mocked the humans' insistence on proportionality and their refusal to exploit advantages. The consensus spread quickly: whatever humans possessed, it could not be decisive, or they would already be using it. Earth warned them anyway. The language never changed. It was precise, unemotional, and consistent. Human representatives stated that continued pressure would lead to outcomes no one wanted. They emphasized boundaries, not dominance. They repeated that escalation would be irreversible. The words were delivered without raised voices or theatrical pauses, which made them easy to ignore. Warnings without spectacle blended into the noise of galactic politics. Privately, councils reassured themselves. If humans were capable of more, they reasoned, restraint would be irrational. Power demanded expression. Deterrence required display. The absence of either proved limitation. The galaxy's experience told it that predators flaunted their teeth. The humans did not. Therefore, the humans could not. What no one noticed was how little humans argued among themselves. There were no leaks, no dissenting broadcasts, no internal threats of withdrawal. Earth's position did not fluctuate with elections or crises. It remained fixed, as if decided long ago. The same phrases appeared in different languages, carried by different envoys, across different systems. The message was not reactive. It was procedural. When the final advisory was issued, it contained nothing new. It referenced earlier filings, cited shared statutes, and reiterated thresholds already communicated. It did not accuse. It did not plead. It simply stated that restraint was conditional and that conditions were being tested. The Council voted shortly after, confident that the vote itself was the show of force that mattered. The resolution passed with comfortable margins. Sanctions were authorized. Patrols were expanded. Observers congratulated one another on managing a potential problem without bloodshed. Humanity's response was logged and set aside, another footnote in a long history of minor powers learning their place. On Earth, the announcement was received without ceremony. No speeches were broadcast. No emergency sirens sounded. The warning had been given, exactly as promised, exactly as written. From the galaxy's perspective, nothing had changed. From humanity's, the record was complete. The measure had been taken. The distance had been calculated. Restraint remained in place, not as a plea, but as a decision, one that could be reversed when misunderstanding became danger. Silence followed, not the silence of hesitation, but of alignment. Systems continued to function. Trade continued. Messages continued. Yet beneath routine, a different ledger closed, recording that patience had been demonstrated, warnings delivered, and responsibility for what followed had unmistakably transferred. Human restraint did not come from fear of others but from memory of themselves. Long before Earth looked outward, it learned what unregulated power did to a species that evolved faster than its wisdom. Humanity reached technological thresholds repeatedly before it earned the right to keep them. Each time, it paid in cities, ecosystems, and generations. Survival was not granted by superiority alone, but by learning when not to use it. The archives that shaped Earth's policies were not military trophies but records of failure. Wars fought with confidence collapsed into stalemates. Weapons built for deterrence became instruments of escalation. Every lesson pointed to the same conclusion. The greatest threat to humanity was not an external enemy, but its own capacity to act without restraint. When humans finally stabilized their world, it was not through domination, but through limits enforced on themselves. Those limits were codified into law long before humanity joined the galaxy. Weapons were designed with governors that could not be overridden by command rank. Artificial intelligences were built to refuse orders that optimized victory at the expense of survival. Strategic doctrines emphasized containment, delay, and reversibility. Victory was redefined as preventing collapse rather than achieving supremacy. These were not weaknesses imposed by outsiders. They were safeguards written by survivors. When humanity reached the stars, it carried those safeguards with it. Exploration fleets traveled with defensive systems deliberately underpowered for their potential. Colonies were established with redundancies instead of fortifications. Even military vessels were designed to be seen as tools of protection rather than symbols of intimidation. Humans chose predictability over surprise, transparency over intimidation, and patience over momentum. To the galaxy, this looked inefficient. Other species externalized risk, projecting violence outward to preserve internal stability. Humanity did the opposite. It absorbed risk inward, accepting vulnerability as the price of control. Human leaders understood that any technology capable of ending a war could just as easily erase the conditions that made peace possible. Restraint was not a moral gesture. It was engineering. The most misunderstood choice was secrecy. Humanity did not advertise its full capabilities, not because it lacked them, but because history had taught a brutal rule. Once a weapon is known, it becomes necessary. Disclosure invites escalation. Demonstration invites replication. Silence, by contrast, preserves options. Earth did not hide to deceive. It withheld to prevent inevitability. Within classified vaults, doctrines existed that were never debated publicly. They were written as contingencies, not ambitions. Their activation criteria were narrow and absolute, requiring consensus across institutions that rarely agreed on anything else. The threshold was simple. If survival itself was placed at risk by external action, restraint would end. Until then, every other response was preferable. This discipline confused the galaxy's analysts. They searched for fractures, for factions eager to break ranks and prove strength. They found none. Humanity's internal debates were fierce, but they ended before policy emerged. Once a position was taken, it held. There were no rogue admirals, no private fleets, no political blocs threatening escalation for leverage. Power existed, but it was contained by design. Humans did not believe themselves morally superior. They believed themselves capable of catastrophic error. That belief shaped everything. Restraint was not trust in others. It was distrust in the ease with which control could be lost. Earth's warnings carried that understanding within them, though few recognized it. The galaxy mistook silence for emptiness, caution for indecision, and patience for delay. What they failed to grasp was that restraint was not the absence of readiness. It was readiness held in check, sharpened by history, and governed by rules that did not bend under pressure. Humanity had not chosen peace because it was harmless. It chose peace because it knew exactly how dangerous it could be, and because it remembered what happened the last time it forgot. The moment restraint ended did not arrive with chaos or confusion. It arrived with clarity. A human monitoring station on the edge of a neutral corridor transmitted its final data packet without panic or distortion. Sensors recorded targeted fire from a coalition patrol that had exceeded its mandate. The station's shields failed exactly as predicted. Civilian technicians were present. Evacuation windows were denied. The transmission ended mid-sentence, not with an alarm, but with a timestamp. Within minutes, Earth issued a response that contained no accusation and no threat. It requested confirmation, cited treaty clauses, and demanded immediate disengagement to allow recovery operations. The reply from the coalition command arrived late and careless. The incident was described as a misunderstanding. Jurisdiction was invoked. Responsibility was deferred. A public statement followed, framed for reassurance, praising restraint and urging calm while patrols were reinforced in the same corridor. Humanity did not debate whether the explanation was sufficient. It reviewed whether the threshold had been crossed. The criteria were narrow and unforgiving. Civilian loss caused by preventable external action. Verified intent through sustained presence. Failure to remediate when presented with evidence. All conditions were met. The assessment concluded without dissent. What followed was not anger, but a procedural transition. A final communication was sent through open channels. It was shorter than any warning that came before it. It acknowledged receipt of the coalition's explanation, stated that it was inadequate, and announced immediate withdrawal from all restraint protocols related to force projection. There were no ultimatums. There was no countdown. The message ended with a single sentence noting that responsibility for escalation had been transferred by documented choice. Across the galaxy, the response was misread yet again. Analysts interpreted the announcement as political theater meant to save face. Commentators speculated about sanctions, symbolic withdrawals, or limited reprisals. Fleet movements were monitored and deemed unremarkable. Human vessels did not surge toward borders. No emergency broadcasts followed. Markets stabilized. The absence of spectacle reassured those who expected fear to be loud. On Earth, systems changed state. Authorizations long kept dormant were validated. Interlocks disengaged in sequences rehearsed but never tested outside simulation. Networks that had operated independently synchronized under constraints designed to prevent excess. This was not mobilization. It was activation. The difference mattered. Mobilization suggests haste. Activation implies readiness waiting for permission. What the coalition did not understand was that humanity's decision-making did not accelerate under pressure. It simplified. Arguments ended because the rules were clear. Once the line was crossed, restraint was no longer a virtue. It became a liability. Continuing it would invite repetition, and repetition would normalize loss. That outcome had been rejected generations earlier at immense cost. There were no victory speeches. No declarations of righteousness. Human leadership addressed their own populations briefly and privately. The message was factual. An external action had made restraint incompatible with survival guarantees. Measures would be taken to restore stability. Civilian life should continue uninterrupted. Compliance with existing protections remained mandatory. Nothing else was required. In the corridors where the incident occurred, coalition patrols reported anomalies. Communications lagged by fractions that compounded into seconds. Navigation solutions disagreed with inertial readings. Command hierarchies issued orders that failed to propagate cleanly. None of this was violent. None of it was overt. It was simply unfamiliar. The environment no longer behaved as expected. By the time coalition observers realized that human systems were no longer constrained to passive modes, the change had already propagated beyond reversal. Restraint had not been abandoned impulsively. It had been released deliberately, according to rules written to ensure that when it ended, it would end completely. The galaxy had mistaken patience for tolerance. It would soon learn the difference between a warning ignored and a condition fulfilled. Restraint had not dulled human capability, it had focused it. When the limits lifted, the galaxy did not face a storm, but a pattern. Human systems did not lash out, they aligned. Networks that had appeared ordinary reconfigured into structures built for control, not conquest. The shift was quiet, precise, and impossible to interrupt once initiated. It prioritized stability, containment, and decisive resolution over display. The first effects were felt in command layers, not battlefields. Coalition fleets found their coordination degrading without damage. Orders arrived out of sequence. Targeting solutions lost consensus. Human interventions did not destroy ships, they isolated authority, severing decision chains so violence could not propagate beyond intent. Confusion spread faster than fear, because nothing exploded and nothing answered as expected anymore. Control vanished without visible cause. Where resistance did emerge, it was met with restraint of a different kind. Human capabilities neutralized weapons by rendering them irrelevant. Energy flows were redirected. Guidance systems were denied coherence. Crews were left alive, uninjured, and unable to fight. The message was implicit: force could be stopped without being answered in kind. Power was applied like engineering, solving for failure modes, not revenge or spectacle. Strategic centers across the coalition reported losses that defied doctrine. No single attack explained them. Human operations prioritized reversibility, locking systems into states that could be undone once compliance returned. Planets were not occupied. Resources were not seized. Only the capacity to harm others was removed, temporarily or permanently, based on response. This was not mercy, it was design chosen to end conflict efficiently. The galaxy had believed that dominance required overwhelming force. Humanity demonstrated that control required understanding. Every action mapped second-order effects. Every intervention was bounded by clear objectives. There were no chases, no sieges, no symbols to rally against. Opponents found themselves unable to escalate, because the ladder had been removed rung by rung. What remained was choice: stand down or persist without means, alone. Observers finally recognized their error. Restraint had hidden capacity, not replaced it. Human technology had matured around limits, making it robust when those limits lifted. There were no single points of failure to exploit. Attempts to counter were anticipated, absorbed, and answered without escalation. The galaxy saw that what it called weakness had been discipline, maintained until misunderstanding became danger. Only then was strength revealed. Even now, humanity did not seek submission. It sought stability that could be enforced. Signals were sent inviting cessation, verification, and repair. Those who complied found systems restored. Those who did not found their capacity to harm others continuously declining. The lesson spread without broadcasts. Humans ended wars by making them unsustainable, not by winning them loudly. The galaxy began to understand what restraint meant. It was not the scale of human tools that unnerved others, but their selectivity. Targets were chosen by impact, not visibility. Time was used as a weapon, compressing decision windows until mistakes ended resistance. Nothing felt random. Everything felt accounted for. Opposition leaders realized too late that predictability was the trap, because it left no space to gamble, bluff, or misread intent again. Ever after. Across neutral systems, independent observers updated their models. They noted that humanity did not maximize advantage. It minimized risk. The difference reshaped calculations. Threat assessments no longer hinged on numbers, but on governance. A species that could restrain itself could be trusted only if its warnings were taken seriously. Ignoring them was now understood as inviting order imposed without permission or apology ever again. Thereafter, the coalition had asked for proof and received instruction. It learned that humanity measured success by what survived, not what fell. Restraint had ended, but control remained. That distinction defined the outcome. The galaxy was not conquered, it was stabilized under terms it had ignored. What followed would be remembered not as defeat, but as the moment assumptions finally failed against discipline made absolute. Decisively. The aftermath did not resemble victory, because humanity had never sought it. Systems resumed normal function as interventions rolled back according to compliance. Markets reopened. Routes stabilized. Survivors returned home. The galaxy discovered that order had been restored without conquest, without banners, and without demands for tribute or surrender anymore. Humanity addressed the coalition again, not from dominance but from record. Every action was documented, reversible, and bounded. Earth stated conditions for restoration, verification procedures, and safeguards against recurrence. Compliance would return autonomy. Defiance would maintain limitations. No threats were issued, because the mechanisms already spoke with clarity themselves fully. Among observers, perception shifted permanently. Humanity was no longer categorized by size or novelty, but by governance. Analysts rewrote models around restraint as capability. The lesson spread quietly. Power controlled is power multiplied. Warnings became signals to heed, not obstacles to bypass. Trust recalibrated around accountability rather than fear alone. Earth did not expand territory or rewrite borders. It proposed frameworks that limited everyone equally, including itself. Enforcement was transparent and shared. The difference was credibility. Humanity demonstrated it would act when conditions were met, and stop when stability returned. That predictability became the new foundation for peace everywhere enduring. For humanity, the outcome carried no celebration. Memorials were quiet. Records were closed. Restraint was reinstated with adjustments learned under pressure. The safeguards remained, stronger for having been tested. Power returned to dormancy, not forgotten, but governed. Survival had been protected, which was the only metric that mattered universally accepted. The galaxy adjusted behavior rather than rhetoric. Patrols slowed. Councils paused before votes. Minor powers cited Earth's filings as precedent. The idea took hold that restraint communicated boundaries more clearly than threats. Ignoring them now carried known consequences, documented and proportionate, leaving little room for miscalculation again ever afterward now. Human envoys returned to measured language, because clarity had been restored. They emphasized cooperation backed by enforceable limits. The galaxy listened differently. Silence carried meaning again. Patience was understood as choice, not delay. The balance held because everyone finally agreed on what would happen if it broke there universally always. No monuments marked the turning point. It lived in procedures, protocols, and expectations. Humanity had warned not to intimidate, but to prevent necessity. When necessity arrived, it was met precisely. The story endured as guidance. Restraint ends when survival is endangered, and control follows immediately thereafter without exception always clearly. The galaxy did not fear humanity afterward, it respected process. That distinction mattered. Power was no longer mythologized, only managed. The warning had become a rule understood by all participants. Earth remained quiet, not because it was harmless, but because quiet was sufficient once understanding replaced assumption entirely everywhere permanently. And so restraint returned to its place, not as weakness, but as policy informed by proof. The galaxy moved forward with clearer rules and steadier hands. Humanity watched, prepared but contained, knowing that warnings mattered only once. After that, responsibility had already chosen its path clearly irrevocably for everyone now. Nothing more needed saying. The record stood complete, referenced, and shared. Future conflicts would begin with memory rather than bravado. The quiet lesson persisted. When humans warn, they are measuring. When they stop warning, the measurement is finished, and the outcome is administrative final conclusive binding universally accepted always everywhere. Peace followed, not because humanity demanded it, but because it could enforce stability without spectacle. The galaxy learned to value limits that worked. Earth remained one voice among many, yet unmistakable. Its warning echoed softly, embedded in systems, waiting patiently for a day never hoped to return again ever once. This was the ending humanity preferred. No conquest, no legends, only continuity. The galaxy adjusted, wiser for it. Restraint endured as choice, not compulsion. And should misunderstanding arise again, the record would speak first, clearly, calmly, and only once more with authority, precision, patience, accountability universally accepted by all parties.